Today we got period 7, part 2. We got it. Period 7, encompasses a lot from 1890 to 1945. Today it's more about, Taft, Wilson, minus World War I. And this would be about from 1909 to 1920-ish in a way. So getting to the kind of mark the end of the 19th Amendment. It doesn't mark the end of the Wilson presidency. Of course, it's always the odd year. So those 2 times, plus women's movement. And that's going to be very important as it culminates with the 19th Amendment being ratified in 1920. We need to kind of take a look about that, because especially for this test, the women's movement is kind of capstone really in the time periods with the passage, the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920. Let me just go back a little bit, because we're just talking about change over time. Let's go back to I got some stuff up here for the, I'm looking up here, looking at all these things here about changing as far as labor unions. And I've always said this in a general way. You should know, the Gilded Age, labor unions as far as their strength and influence is down. Progressive movement, they're up. 1920s, they go back down. Up to 1930s, they go back up. And some of these things on here that, so Mr. Price, the Taft-Hartley Act, that's not going to be, on the test. Not really, but this is all about complex understanding and change over time. I don't think a lot of this early 20th century material will be on the DBQ. I don't know if you'll have a DBQ on it, but you will need this 20th century material, this early 20th century material, to give complex understanding, the unicorn point, or some kind of historical context. It's going to show knowledge. You're not just, again, isolating U.S. history in facts. You're kind of comparing and contrasting. You're actually seeing about the cause and the effects. How did foreign policy change over time? What about these labor unions? You see the railroad strike. You see that they're going through a lot of things. They're at Haymarket, 1886. The Sherman Antitrust Act is really used to bust up unions. They have to amend it during the Progressive era with the Clayton Antitrust Act, just specifically say, no, this is not to break up labor unions. You see I'm kind of going out of order, don't worry about it. Anthracite coal strike, 1902, you see Teddy Roosevelt kind of stepping in here, trying to be an arbitrator by somebody of goodwill. Then it really with the, Fair Labor Standards Act, with the Wagner Act here in the 1930s, FDR, you get collective bargaining made legal, unions legal as far as the way, and it's kind of reversed with Taft-Hartley. It's saying that no, you even have to take a pledge that you're not a communist if you're in a union. That's not what the Taft-Hartley Act is so bad. It says, hey, closed shops are illegal. Change over time. Now, I'm not, concentrating, but it's a good kind of thing. That's how you should be studying. That should be your frame of mind. Good. All right. So, all right. Mr. Taft, and I'm not going to embarrass Mr. Taft by showing the picture of him on the yachts in the Philippines and his, he's a large dude, and and again, he's a tall dude. He's just a big guy in a way. But I think I will find a cartoon where you see that Roosevelt is not going for a third term in 1908. His hand-picked man is Taft. You see, I think I'll get the cartoon with the baby Taft that he's kind of pointing to. That's his man at the time. But it foreshadows his things to come. It's like any movie. You always see this setup. It's tropey, in a high school movie, in any type of movie that you're good buddies at the beginning. Hey man, thick and thin, hey, we're going to be friends forever. And you get by the middle of the movie, this big split, and maybe at the end you get some reconciliation. And really, Taft and Roosevelt does not go any kind of reconciliation. Tiara dies, and they haven't reconciled themselves. So I put like, just forget about Taft. If you forget Taft, don't worry. What you need to know that he is in that progressive era. He's a little bit more conservative than Theodore Roosevelt. He's a more of a conservative Republican. Kind of even campaigns for more of the conservative wing in 1910. You know that he's really during this time that, with the Ballinger-Pinchot affair, that, he kind of goes against Teddy. He busts up more trust from, Standard Oil, the big enchilada in a way, Postal Child American Tobacco Company. Over about 90 trusts he kind of files suits against. I think Teddy Roosevelt's about 80. He's more of a trust. And he actually sets, you had Teddy Roosevelt's always getting the picture about being Mr. Conservation. Taft does a lot in one term as far as like reserving land, set aside the land for conservation as well. I know you get to, Pinchot is kind of really, who's head of forestry, just really is getting a little bit upset about them, and he, runs to Teddy, or Teddy hears about it, and, and he kind of blows up. Teddy can't shut his mouth up. That's the thing is, and while he's still a prominent figure. Teddy Roosevelt is very popular. When you have popular presidents, if you want to put like a term that you need to know, they usually have a mandate. It's unwritten. It's not like in the Constitution, but you just more by default that you can do more. Andrew Jackson, George Washington, who came before, Teddy Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, Ronald Reagan. They are popular presidents who have more of a mandate. You guys have not experienced a very popular president in your lifetime, and they just can do more. Even if you have in Congress the opposite party and the opposition there, they just do that. Dollar diplomacy, they just really U.S. going in, making sure they're securing their business interests in Latin America and the Western Hemisphere at this time. But that's about, you don't have to worry about Mann-Elkins Act and anything like that. And it ends up with, as I'm looking at my script here, of course, with the election of 1912. Don't forget, Taft is a Republican candidate and Wilson is a Democratic candidate. I put them two first because they are in like the major parties by the time of the late 19th century and early 20th century all the way up to the current times. It's hard for any third party to make any type of real significant, electoral vote gain, into presidential elections. So they're the two major parties. And these spoilers is a Teddy Roosevelt. And you know the reason why Teddy Roosevelt got into this. And you recognize if you see the Bull Moose Party or / the Progressive Party, Bull Moose is the nickname or the kind of mascot of the Progressive Party. And Eugene V. Debs was social. And again, Teddy Roosevelt is bringing that hardcore progressive agenda, that 8-hour workday, women's suffrage that we're going to talk about later already in here. And he's talking about all these things like, national health care, banning child labor. He doesn't say anything about this anti-lynching and anti-segregation laws that Jane Addams wanted him to do when they're trying to, at their convention, the progressive platform here. But he's not going that far. But for the most part, pushing the progressive agenda. And the results. Wilson wins because the Republican Party is split. Some of those Republicans are going to vote in the kind of more progressive part of the wing to Teddy Roosevelt. And this is why Wilson wins. And I don't know for sure, historians have kind of analyzed this election. If Teddy didn't even run, that Wilson might have still pulled this out and everything in here. Eugene V. Debs pulls in a lot of votes as well. Review 1912 election. You should be thinking of going through your head once I say that. Elections to remember: 1896, 1860, 1824, 1800. So these are kind of the elections that you really want to, put in your head for the test that's coming up on May 15th. Very good. New nationalism, new freedom. That's Teddy Roosevelt's progressive agenda. Wilson is more, kind of say, give small businesses, the freedom to prosper, break up the major trusts, of course, and regulate them, but it should be more of his new freedom agenda. I think you're kind of splitting hairs of just trying to remember that. Wilson, don't just, come on. I mean, there's so much legislation here. Just pick one or two to remember under Wilson as far as progressive agenda. Starting with, maybe in a way, the Federal Reserve Act, setting up those 12 Federal Reserves to loan money to other banks. Clayton Antitrust Act is really going to amend in a way the Sherman Antitrust Act to make it more effective against big trust. Put in the kind of enforcement and take out the attacks on strikes and labor unions in that way. Federal Trade Commission, good business practices are going to be regulated. Kind of, again, this kind of expansion of government, before you really get into FDR, making it almost like permanent and just really making, government a part of this kind of, part of what we know of today. So you got, that, you got maybe, Keating and Owens Act about child labor, Adamson Act, really about regulation of railroad and as far as the hours there. And you even just some farm subsidies going on here. And the big ones that are passed here, as you know, is the progressive amendments that I've probably been saying, repeating on this video several times here. The big ones here, the 16, 17, 18 to 19. By the way, to get into some more confusing matter, and I put an asterisk that thing about the 16th Amendment, really ratified February of 1913, they're squinching my eyes here, while Taft is still president. You don't have president's inauguration until March 4th. But no grader is going to really get on to you about maybe saying that's attributed to Wilson. It's like the tariff abominations in 1828. Or really, if you say it happened under the presidency of Andrew Jackson, I don't think graders are going to get real mad if the rest of your essay is really good. That is a mistake easily forgiven. Even with Lincoln, look how many states, all the lower South has seceded before Lincoln is really officially president. You still have James Buchanan there, but nobody is going to really be hardcore on you. And the one I always see is that the Texas annexation of 1845. Does that really happen under Polk or John Tyler? Really, March 1st to the 3rd, that Texas is being kind of the annex legislation is being sent to Congress at the time. And, Texas has not really joined the Union until December under Polk, but really annexation takes place under John Tyler there. So see, that's really splitting hairs. Don't even worry about that. The American system under Madison in 1816 and the Second Bank Charter, and then you get Monroe's presidency in 1817. Don't worry. By the way, speaking of secession, I think I put it up here in my notes too. That's another confusing thing: seceding and seceding. Make sure you might want to put that in your confusing chart that that states are trying to secede. I can see somebody making a careless error about that. Nonetheless, so you got Mr. Wilson there. Now, that's his domestic progressive agenda. No one or two things about that. That's real good. The big thing, the big earth-shattering thing, his foreign policy agenda. We've had, again here, big stick, dollar. Now Wilson becomes an adjective for the 20th and 21st century. Wilsonian diplomacy, moral diplomacy. Wilsonian, that is an adjective that is used on here. It's like, what if you're Reaganesque or you're Wilsonian, you're a New Dealer or something of that nature. That is an adjective for a time. Please, and I'm taking the pause for 3 seconds. Wilsonian diplomacy. Why Wilsonian diplomacy is so big? Does it sound familiar? It's idealistic. You're going to spread American democracy around the world without being imperialistic, without being a colonizer, without being this kind of, that you're going to have dependent like countries upon you. You're not going to be, having dominions, across the world. Now, I know some of you are probably smiling and laughing, sounds very hypocritical, what the reality is. That's the thing is that you got to understand, it's very idealistic. In practice, it does not really, it does not really jive. It's not the reality of it. But we all do, all the presidents. It's the precedents that Wilson is sending here in this diplomacy, that in his address, April 2nd, 1917, make the world safe for democracy. We're going to, create this kind of idealized world. We're going to show you what Americans do in our country. And we know how hypocritical that can be as well, and spread it around the world. And plus, other countries, especially in the Western Hemisphere, need this kind of tutelage, this patronage, because they are not, know the winds of democracy. They're not used to that. They're used to caudillos and these military generals, but we'll show them how to do elections right. And, and we'll even occupy you if we have to show you how to elect. We'll even do elections over again, in this. So he's saying this. He says we desire, in his address, I love that, we desire no conquest, no dominion. We're not France, we're not Great Britain. We are Wilsonian in our foreign diplomacy and our foreign policy kind of agenda. That's what we would like to say. A lot of countries around the world would like to, speak up about that, whether it be Iran, Guatemala, Chile, well, most of Latin America for the 20th century, I can just tell you that, Cuba, that, and the Middle East for sure, Afghanistan, right? It's like, well, I don't think it's all Wilsonian in practice. Even Wilson, really gets involved in the Russian Civil War. He talks about his 14 points, self-determination, and he's already sending American troops to fight in the Russian Civil War, against the Reds and the Whites and the Communist Civil War. Very, very hypocritical in practice. But it is what we strive, and what you're going to hear all the presidents strive for is this kind of Wilson. And Franklin Roosevelt is big on this. You can see this. His United Nations is going to echo the League of Nations for sure. And his Atlantic Charter is really the 14 points of Woodrow Wilson. These things here you bring together. That's why it's so important to know Wilsonian diplomacy or moral diplomacy, because it compare and contrast. It has lasting influence over time. It's foreign policy statement. What are the examples in Latin America? What they're going to do? And again, if they don't, with the Jones Act and with giving Puerto Rico their American citizenship, kind of giving the Philippines that territory with the Jones Act in 1916 over there in Asia. That's his kind of Wilsonian democracy. They occupy Haiti. We occupy Haiti from 1915 to into the 1930s with FDR, going in here, and Herbert Hoover in the 1930s. Nicaragua, you didn't do your election right. You didn't get the right person. So that's what that. And what happens with Mexico, the intervention there. You think it's stable, you got your guy Carranza, and then, Pancho Villa is causing all this havoc. They intervene, there's some conflict here, so you're not going to do a full-scale war, especially as things are heating up in Europe. So that's his Wilsonian kind of diplomacy, but it's not supposed to be just kind of militaristic in these things about occupation. That seems a little bit hypocritical as well. But it's the idealize that we're going to have democracy in the Western Hemisphere. We're going to have democracy all over. American democracy, true democracy, the best democracy. And again, I'm speaking those idealized terms. So it really, it's what you're thinking of already, Mr. Price, is the 14 points. Right, it's no secret treaties, it's, about free trade, it's self-determination, all those key points that is echoed in the Atlantic Charter, in 1941 in August, that he's doing already, setting the stage for that politicians, presidents, and all of them are stated about what, what is the American foreign policy. And of course, trying to create this kind of peace league that's going to make sure that war and conflict around the world. Very much. And this is Wilson's background, his professorial background from Virginia and Princeton, that he's really trying to, but he's a kind of that progressive, right, that he kind of knows, and this is what he sees here, kind of everybody holding hands in a way and peace around the world. Why actually being kind of saying that America is better than anybody else too at this time. But anyway, know that no Wilsonian / moral diplomacy here and what the goals are for that. Very good. Now, kind of coming towards we need to subset. We'll talk more about Wilson with World War I on Monday. The women's rights movement. In the 19th century, starting with the Second Great Awakening. And by the way, I probably did not emphasize this. Women are a big part of the Second Great Awakening. They feel like this is an opportune time. They're more about, at this time, is in the 1840s. I know you have Seneca Falls and the Declaration of Rights sentiments. They're not really early suffragettes. Don't worry, Elizabeth Cady Stanton really wants to already push the voting into the Declaration. It's more about prosperity and property. That coverture rights, you don't have to remember that word. I'm just talking about property rights. Women get married. They want to know that they still have some rights. They can have some say so if there is a divorce, about kids, custody, property inheritance if their husband dies, business. It's kind of ironic way, a lot of women who are kind of stigmatized in society, who are unmarried, can own a business, can have property, have a little bit more coverture right. That's what they're more, and the prosperity meaning that go to college, be professional, become a doctor. They are more concentrated on that. Now, after the 15th Amendment passage in 1870, it really calls attention that they need suffrage right because black men get the right to vote. It's going to split the celebrities that Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and the National Women's Suffrage Association. So, and again, it gets kind of confusing. Don't worry, you don't have to really remember these kind of acronyms for these, and you get more. You don't have to remember Julia Ward Howe and Lucy Stone, who I do love, again, and the American Women's Suffrage Association, who accepts the 15th Amendment and they want to work on another amendment. And you see they're a little bit more conservative. The other group is a little bit more radical because they're very upset that white women did not get the right to vote, and it causes some really kind of split in their goals. Black women are going to have to form their own suffrage association in the 1890s because they feel like their needs are not being met. They come together, as the Beatles would say, in 1890. I don't remember the dates, the late 19th century, to form NASA, which is more confusing, National American Women's Suffrage Association. So, and you get ladies like Carrie Chapman Catt, Anna Howard Shaw, kind of the old school ladies, and they're thinking to go state by state. You're already starting with, in the late 19th century, Wyoming, but you're getting a Nevada, you're getting states out there like Montana, women's suffrage right to vote early in the 20th century. So they're thinking a state by state strategy. The woman you need to remember in the early 20th century, I think, for this test is Alice Paul. So she's thinking that with the National Women's Party, that they need to get a little bit more assertive and somewhat aggressive in their kind of call for a constitutional amendment. Let's get back to pushing this national amendment so we can solidify a woman's rights to vote. All right, that is the best way. Parades and protests, and you see the women here, again, you see them again dressed up parades. And the big thing about it, because for a push that you always see that is very significant, is during the war they're still protesting outside the White House in Washington, D.C. with these banners for women's right to vote. That's big because you know what happens in war. What is the pattern? Nationalism and patriotism just blows up. And you ladies want to be calling Woodrow Wilson Kaiser Wilson. How unpatriotic. And matter of fact, are you a German spy? Are you for the enemy? You're not helping the country. You know nationalism just really increases during wartime. You got the American Protectorate Society. You got all these, about 250,000 spying on neighbors and stuff during this time and really castigating these women. Going long. So after the war, Wilson kind of hedges on here that likes, again, this is maybe the opportune time to do this. And with Tennessee, I think it was like the 36th state that kind of, ratified it by 1920. Big win. Alice Paul was really in the early 1920s. She would be pushing for an equal rights amendment early on. So it's not something that happens in the 1960s and 1970s. That shows you that her and her representation of the women's part in the women's movement is all about. Really trying to push a very progressive, ahead of time agenda. Very good. So, very important to know that kind of change over time. They're kind of like, you don't need to know every little detail, but you do need to know the celebs. And I mentioned the celebs. I think that's probably kind of the ladies that are ones in there, of course. Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. But they passed away early in the 20th century, and kind of Alice Paul takes up and Lucy Burns and ladies of that, ilk really try to probably gets it over the goal line where the 19th Amendment is ratified. Good. And naturally, just want to wind up and say, well, what did the progressive achieve? People say, well, did they achieve? And that's been arguments in the past, DBQs. Is like, what are you going to say? Hey, did they make a lasting influence? Or they really, were just a blip in kind of the evolution of the history of the United States and not something that had a kind of like big influence? Well, no, I mean, they achieved, in my opinion, and based on fact, and this is what you'll be doing, is that you just don't, make a thesis statement, you support it with facts. You don't just say, just because you feel this way, you think it's that way. They all wanted orderly social change. They didn't want revolution. And for the most part, that's what they wanted. They want to keep the capitalist system in there. They really bring in the usher in the era of like realistic journalism, that it's not as sensationalized, it's actually helpful and conducive for society to do some investigative reporting, if you want to use a modern day 20th century term at this time, and exposing some societal challenges, exposing unfair labor practices, conditions in the city. That's what they're doing. And the big thing is that businesses are going to need to be regulated, and even big businesses recognize they need to kind of pull back a little bit or they're going to have a bad image. And you see this really a lot today, I think, in the 21st century. I'm not trying to laud big businesses and corporations, but they really have one of the biggest part once you get this large and everything is your public relations and what can you give back to the community, give back to the state, to the country, to every part of your community. What can you donate, what you can do. You have to say this starts really early in progressive era, kind of reining in this kind of just extreme profits, taking advantage of the little man and the little woman in the workplace. So very much there. And, they're pioneers of a social safety net. I know everybody hates socialism / communism, but, the progressives saw early on that there may be a time when the nation, either at war or even during a crisis, I don't know what crisis that may be at this time, you may need a social safety net. You may need unemployment, compensation and insurance. If you know, like you're a hard worker, but there's just no job opportunities at the time, or you got laid off or furloughed. Okay, you may need some type of aid from the federal government to stimulate the economy, to kind of help us out. They brought that attention that there may need a role for the national government. Why we need that, graduating income tax. They need some more income in there. So anyway, that made me think again. Another senior moment. Forgot about the Underwood tariff that Wilson had. And the reason why I bring that up is because it's a good. That tariff you can remember because it's under Woodrow Wilson. That's a great memory device. It's the Underwood tariff on there, so it's under Woodrow Wilson. And and here's something that we gotta remember: Democrats, all right, and Republicans, they want lower tariffs. Republicans and Whigs, they want higher tariffs. You can put that maybe on your, little crib sheet there and everything to always remember by. So now it's gonna help make you remember on that. So the Underwood tariff, and the tariff abominations, that's probably one that you can, two that you can remember for study for May 15th. Anyway, again, I already went long enough to that, that the video turned off on me. Take it easy, have a good weekend, schedule your time, please.